Hi, and welcome to the Thank God for the Beatles podcast. If this is your first time, welcome, and if you are returning, it's great to have you back. I'm Karen, and joining me as co-host is my brother Jeff. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Karen. Hey, everyone.
And our episode today features the Beatles' 1965 album, Rubber Soul. And as George Martin, their producer, said about Rubber Soul, it's the first album to present a new growing Beatles to the world. And you know, it was an album where they influenced other bands, again, other bands taking the lead from the Beatles in how to put together something that is cohesive and truly in a new direction. So first impressions of this album, released in 1965, and I'm speaking from memories of years later because I was born in the 60s, in the mid-60s. And so my impression was the pictures on the back of the album, which were the artsy black and white photos, and particularly the one of Paul smoking. And I'm sure that in later years I might have just taken the scissors and chopped it out or cut it out to put in my scrapbook, as young girls do.
Just of Paul?
Probably just of Paul.
Right.
And, you know, the album cover, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is so striking because the men look more like men and they look more serious. I mean, it's just such a different vibe about it.
Well, in your mid-20s, you start looking your full maturity of your youth. So, yeah, I can see what you're saying about that. You're talking about a new direction, and I think that Paul, when he was describing this album in the anthology, mentioned that Rubber Soul is a new direction, moving away from their poppy stuff like Thank You Girl and She Loves You, towards a more surreal version of music and wanting to explore, new sounds, new instruments. And we're going to get more into that too. And you'll hear all the influences. We're going to discuss that. But basically, he was moving away from being pop stars, which they were. They were all danceable songs and pop songs and love songs, very simple and straightforward, into songs that involved a bit more thought, a bit more introspection, a bit more some of the both the light and the dark side.
So setting the time frame for this album is that in the summer, the Beatles had toured, I believe, America and Canada, and they had made their way to L.A. They had met their idol, Elvis Presley, and John, I think, came away less than impressed. Mm-hmm. They also spent time, I think, with the Byrds. They also spent time with the Beach Boys and hung out, and this was the influence of marijuana in their lives, where it became a much more profound influence on them, and a lot of listening to Dylan and more of the acoustic folk movement. So all of these things kind of put it in the melting pot for them to create this album. And what's interesting is that the tour ended, I believe, probably in August. Oh, to mention Shea Stadium, which was in August of 65, the largest concert ever, the highest grossing, flown in, and then I think taken to the stadium in a Wells Fargo bank truck, huge energy expended, and they come away in the fall and they're just exhausted. They'd made Help earlier in the year, and so this exhaustion, and then here's the pressure from Brian and George Martin, which is they need to produce a long playing album before the Christmas holidays in order to take advantage of that. So here they go into the studio October 12th, and when you put this in context, that they recorded this album basically from October 12th till about November 15th, that is mind-blowing.
Well, 1 month recording nowadays is almost unheard of, and that is extremely rapid. And I can't underestimate the influence of marijuana, which, by the way, Bob Dylan introduced them to. I think it was during Help, they said they were stoned throughout most of the movie. And of course, we'll probably go into the movie at some point. But yeah, that became more prevalent. They were giggling and high. Although they wouldn't do that in the studio because George Martin didn't approve of it, I think that they decided, well, they looked at these influences that were happening around them, and of course they turned that around and decided they were going to make a more proper record, exploring different sounds. So this was the beginning of a transitional change from being a pop band into a serious artists.
And they also had more carte blanche because they were so wildly successful that when they returned to Abbey Road, they had the luxury of kind of changing how they did things, which in the past they might bring their final rehearsed songs to the studio to record, whereas now they would go to the studio with their bits and their pieces and their lyrics, and they would turn on the tapes and they would just run them through while the Beatles rehearsed them, where they there are some awesome outtakes on YouTube of, like, think for yourself, it's like 19 minutes of John trying to get the harmony right and just hearing them back and forth. It's like the Monty Python dialogue. I mean, it's hysterical. I just can't imagine that they ever got any work done.
Oh, they were like the Marx Brothers. And plus they knew the tape was running. So they decided, well, if we're going to be practicing, rehearsing, and we're going to be recorded at the same time, well, what would you do? Well, they turn it into a comedy act. Speaking of, one of the lesser known facts about Rubber Soul is that in the beginning, McCartney made a comment about it being sort of their comedy album, quote unquote, although it's not really comic, but there are elements of that. If you listen to Michelle and Girl, they could pass as parodies of Maurice Chevalier and Zorba the Greek, with their references in that song, tit, 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 and the French singing. And then you go into songs like Drive My Car and Norwegian Wood, which almost approach a punchline but do not. Now, it is a very serious record, mind you, but there was some element of that, the ooh la la las, some of those elements of it, but it ended up turning out to be a more serious record. Although in the beginning, I think some of the intent was to add a little lightheartedness to it as well. I think that what Paul set out to do was, again, just to create a departure into a new phase. And so whatever they intended to start out as, it ended up being a really wonderful, serious product that encompassed.
This album really demonstrates their collaboration, how they wrote songs together, how they filled in the missing pieces, how they really worked together. And it was, if you read George Martin's biography by Kenneth Womack, then you get a sense that this is truly John's album. Mm-hmm. Even though Paul is forceful and creative and everything, it just sounds like John was still in control. And there was a shift in Rubber Soul in that in the past, George Martin would be in control of the control room, of how things are recorded. They would say, hey, George, we want to do this. Okay, you can do that, or no, you can't. And here's where the power begins to shift more to the Beatles, which is they realized that they wanted to find new sounds. They were open to everything. Paul has said over and over, we just didn't want to keep sounding like the same songs over and over. We needed to grow ourselves.
They wanted every album to be different than the last one. As simple as that. You can't just keep going, making nothing but, pop songs with the same kind of sound, which is unfortunately what we have in modern records. Everyone seems to be imitating one another, and record companies have some formulaic type of sound. We've gone back to that, unfortunately. But they insisted on being able to change from album to album and trust their audience to come along with them on that ride. The creativity that goes into this, for instance, when you listen to Norwegian Wood and George Harrison introduces the sitar, because they did takes over and over and over and couldn't quite get it right. There was something missing. And what they needed in that musical refrain was another instrument, and that was the exotic sitar that George Harrison was learning from Ravi Shankar. And
but it goes to their anything goes kind of attitude, which was he's lugging in the giant sitar, and they're trying to make it work. And thankfully, George Martin had experience recording, I think on a Peter Sellers album, the sitar to bring to this album. And they used all types of different instruments. I think Ringo played the timpani drums. I mean, did I mispronounce that? I don't know. Timpani? I'm not sure what it is.
I think it's a timpani.
So in the idea of having to produce all this material, the Beatles had to bring what they had, and they didn't have the 14 songs that were required for the British release.
Mm-hmm.
They also had to produce a separate single with a B-side
Mm-hmm.
before Christmas as well. So essentially 16 songs to deliver within this time frame. So talk about really under the gun.
Talk
And
about pressure. Right.
John had said that he did his best writing under pressure, under this intense pressure to do so. And, it does bear fruit when he said that. I mean, it really backs up because he's written songs on here that are amazing, that are just the timeless songs.
I think that John reached a songwriting peak on this record, and Paul was approaching his songwriting peak. I think his kind of blossomed fully more in the next album, Revolver, but let's not underestimate them. Paul really put forth really brilliant efforts on this record, again, to match with John. But John really reached, I think, some of his best writing. As you said, he did it under pressure, and he came through. This is definitely the mark of an album that if you want to hear the best of John Lennon as a Beatle, this is the go-to album.
And also, let's note the change in their personal lives, which is John, George, and Ringo married with Ringo and John had kids, or were beginning to have kids, and George had just gotten married, and they were moved to the suburbs.
They were in the suburbs.
Paul continued to live in London, so often they would go out to John's place and write together.
Right,
Yes.
in the suburbs of, again, we talked about this before, where he lived in a wealthy suburb along with stockbrokers. But was his life with Cynthia at the time, and of course, that's the location where they took the album cover photo. We'll get more into that later. But
so one of the things is when we were listening to the music again and trying to find the alternate takes, is that on the anthology album, there's not a lot of material from there. There's a Norwegian Wood outtake. I'm Looking Through You. There's something else I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do know that I'm Down is there. And at the end of I'm Down, Paul is saying, plastic soul, man, plastic soul. And so throughout the course of this album, they didn't have a title to the end, till close to November when it was due. And Plastic Soul was a comment made by one of the blues black musicians, American musicians, about Mick Jagger singing Plastic Soul. And so Paul just kind of turned it into Rubber Soul. And it's pretty cool. And we may as well just talk about the cover photo. The cover photo and the cover is significant for a couple of reasons. One, that amazing photograph by Robert Freeman.
It was projected onto a cardboard to see the size, which was the size of an album cover. And they decided, okay, we'll pick this photo. They went through a series of photos. Okay, we like that one. And then serendipitously, that album cover card that was the size of the album cover fell back slightly, which elongated the projected image. Okay? And they said, that's it. That's what we want.
And they said to Robert Freeman, can you print that? Can you do that? And he could. The other notable piece about this is that this is the first album that doesn't have the Beatles' name on it. It just says Rubber Soul. And the very cool font used, it was a London art director, I guess Charles Front or something, who developed the logo-ish for it, which kind of became the hippie font for those years.
Oh, the stretched logo. By the way, that original logo sold at an auction in 2008 for 9,600 British pounds, which in US dollars at that time I calculated to be about $11,695. Is that insane? Think about the influence just to have a logo that's attached to Beatles history.
Well, I would think it would have sold for more, honestly.
It would have. Yeah, that's a bit disappointing, but then a logo was a logo. Now, it's not an item that the Beatles held personally, but is someone that helped actually made history by designing that piece of the cover. Yeah, and more about that cover. If you want to look back at that and look at what they were wearing, as they were looking at different colors scheme, like the browns, okay, and the greens. They were going for that type of look, and they used Weybridge, which is the back of John's yard with the high grass. You see the high bushes behind them, and they're all wearing their turtlenecks and looking really like sleek French artists. And then that album cover became so iconic that National Lampoon in 1977, I think it was October, put out a parody of it by taking the Beatles picture and putting rabbi hats on it and calling it Rabbi Saul, which is still funny to this day. So yes, that gives you some idea of the influence of this album, of just the artwork on the album.
Yes. And this is the first album where Ringo gets a songwriting credit. So let's jump into the songs. And on side 1, we have Drive My Car, which is it's kind of like what they said is it's got that Otis Redding. It's kind of got that very Motownish. I think this album is so inspired by Motown and the guitars are playing, the licks that they're playing, and it's a lot of Paul's guitar work as well.
Well, it's really like a kind of it's a send up. The song showcases a very soulful type of vocal. It is a very Otis Redding type of vocal coming from Paul, and the lyrics are very playful and clever and lighthearted and full of innuendo. And I think that was a great opener to the record. I think in terms of calling it a soulful song, but not really. But it's a rocker. It's one of Paul's great rockers, I think. But it's also got some clever lyrics in it. And,
very clever.
Yeah.
About relationships, and not so much personal relationships, but not from their own life, but just kind of, I think, commenting about,
I've got no car and it's breaking my heart, but I found a driver and that's a start. And that's a great line. I'm not sure if that's John that came up with it, but if it's Paul's song mostly, that's classic.
And this might be one of the first songs where Paul has used his Rickenbacker bass, a 4001S. And, on this album, the Beatles began to play different instruments. They got their Fender Stratocasters, and Paul had his Rickenbacker bass. And so, even that gives it a different tone of what they're bringing, these new sounds. So Drive My Car is fun. And then I would have to say, and we'll talk about this at the end of what we feel our best song is, but Norwegian Wood is, I don't know how anybody could turn the channel on a station when Norwegian Wood is playing. It's such a beautiful song.
I think coming out of John's probably a sense of guilt and kind of a naughty sense of fun, like, okay, I had this affair. I don't want Sin to know about it, but I'm kind of confessing His wife, Cynthia, thank you. And I'm going to confess it to you anyway. I once had a girl, and that first line, I once had a girl, you're hooked right there. And then he tells you the rest of the story. And it is like a story, probably based on some type of truth. She told me she worked in the morning and started to laugh. I told her I didn't and crawled up to sleep in the bath. This is great. These are lyrics are just...
that are visual, that tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
They're ambiguous. And John has said, well, it wasn't really about one person in particular. It could have been several things, but it's often been said that it was a journalist, Maureen Cleave, but who knows?
Well, it's got a kind of a duality to it too. There's a sense of intimacy about confessing the affair and describing it as he saw the affair or affairs, and then a kind of sense of detachment from it too. So and he has a writer's detachment. I think that's part of John's character. So he's always been a writer, I think, at heart. He wrote in his own right. I think this is more of a continuation of that type of writing, and I think he was encouraged to actually write more about his own experiences. So here you have the opening of a more confessional John, of a more introspective John, and that's why Norwegian Wood is so striking. It's so different from what had come before, and I don't think I've ever heard anything quite like that since.
And adding the sitar in, adding the harmonies. The song, they spent many hours on it and several days to get it just right, because I think they always felt that there was something lacking. And It's just the guitar work. Everything about it is a hit. And I read a quote from Paul, and Paul had said that he had added the section about burning down the house.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I never really felt that it was like burning down the house.
No.
And so I lit her fire. I mean, I thought it was more of a symbolic kind of thing, but if that's what the Beatles are saying, then that's what the Beatles are saying.
Maybe he lit a fire in a fireplace, or he struck a match and smoked a cigarette. I don't think he had any intention of burning down a house. Trust me.
But I mean, Paul has referred to that, so
Yeah.
it's interesting. And
Yeah.
maybe it's just more of Paul's revisionist.
Yeah. I think Paul is guilty of revisionist history, as you would have it. I'm sure John would have an answer for it.
Yes.
But John, you notice, never knocks that song. There's some of his songs that he does not like, or he didn't like in later years, but that's one I think that he should be duly proud of, and it's great.
And when we talk about the next song, which is You Won't See Me, and by the way, we're talking about the song list order from the British 14-song LP versus the American. I mean, the Americans all the American releases get so confusing because they chopped them up, they made different things, and it's so disappointing, but we're going to stick to
we'll get out just so you all know, and I'm sure a lot of you fans, if you're already a fan, you know that Capitol Records took those albums apart and repackaged them in the way they wanted to. So we're going to stick with the original intention of the Beatles with the British releases, because I'd rather have 14 songs on an album than 10 or 12. So, and frankly, when I listen to it, it's a more cohesive record. And You Won't See Me, what an amazing track. A lot of the songs, I think, around that time were about the relationships, and this is no exception. You have Paul and Jane Asher, and I think there's the legendarily tumultuous relationship, and I think that's a fantastic song by Paul. And it's not just John, Paul, George, and Ringo. It's John, Paul, George, Ringo, and Mal Evans, their roadie, who plays Hammond organ on You Won't See Me. A little known fact to some people. So I don't know if he got credit on the record, but he was on there. And
well, it's such maturity from Paul, and that Paul has said that he said he doesn't hold grudges, and that he writes these songs to deal with his emotions, and he's even said that sometimes in relationships you have these bad days or these bad times, and he was frustrated because Jane Asher is a legendary and quite acclaimed actress, English actress, and was on tour with plays and not accessible to him and not at his beck and call. And it just dawned on him.
Right. Well, she was an independent woman long before it became popular in culture to gain independence. She already was striking her own way. She had her own life. She had her own career. Frankly, she didn't really need Paul. And I think that kind of stuck in Paul for some reason. He wanted to feel nurtured and needed, and because why he married Linda in the end.
And again, we're just our opinions.
That's just
our judgment.
I'm just reflecting my total judgment and
Yes.
my observation. Sorry for the analysis there, but You Won't See Me. When I call you up, your line's engaged. Just the frustration of that, of not being able to get through to someone or reach someone. I think that Paul wrote songs, mostly his best songs were written out of conflict and frustration, even though he hated conflict and frustration, like Band on the Run, for instance. That album was produced out of some conflict, band members leaving, and that's how he processed conflict. So he did the same thing as a Beatle. When there was conflict in the relationship, he took those and translated them into some of his very best material.
Well, it's a great song, and again, it goes to where the Beatles are in their personal lives, which is writing about things that may be happening to them, but it's so relatable for everybody else. You know, everyone else understands exactly what's happening there. And so into this confessional tone, we move into Nowhere Man, and such a huge song. And it's not one that I listen to all the time.
I love Nowhere Man. Nowhere Man has been used in Yellow Submarine later in the film. I think it takes on its own kind of meaning. I think that John was reflecting his own a kind of sense of a loss of self. I think he was more inwardly reflecting about himself in that song. John writes about himself. He's a real nowhere man sitting in his nowhere land. I think he kind of maybe felt that way about his personal life at that point and was just projecting that into the song. But I think all of us can feel like someone that feels out of place. It's about the person that doesn't seem to fit.
Well, he often spoke of a fat Elvis period, and it was just kind of feeling crappy, and
He felt
everything had changed in their lives.
He didn't want to come out and say, I feel crappy. He did that later on Plastic Ono Man solo record. But on this record, he's a real nowhere man sitting in his nowhere land. Is reflective of kind of not knowing what to do next, feeling kind of, okay, I'm in this life now. What do I do next? What do I do now? Who am I? And well, John was deep enough at least to reflect on that. And I think it's a beautiful song. It's, again, something only he could have really written.
And he notes that he spent about 5 hours trying to write this song, and he gave up and he went and laid down. And then after, he just went back to it. And as he said, letting go sometimes, can help. And it is a song notable for the guitars, which feature the Fender Stratocasters, and it was their desire for a very trebly sound, and so the guitars naturally.
It's very much like the Byrds.
Trebly.
I think it's the guitar sound on there sounds a lot like what the Byrds were doing.
And then they asked the engineers to make it even more trebly, so it has a different sound guitar wise.
It's very jangly.
Yes,
yeah,
that's a great word, jangly.
Jangly, yes,
very jangly.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean, that's such a beautiful bass line in it. Because I know when I try to play that, it's just a beautiful melodic bass line. And again, Paul's using the Rickenbacker for the most part on this album, and it sounds different. It's more present in the mix.
Let's think about, too, the work they put into blending the harmonies and the vocals on this song, and as well as the rest of the record, are excellent. I think they never sounded better vocally together. I think there's very much the harmonies, and again, there's the Beast Boys influence. Some of that was kind of crept into it, but the Beatles always loved to do harmony, and here they capitalized on that. In fact, it starts off with harmony. It's not John singing solo, so he wanted his bandmates with him on this. It's a really great group effort. All right.
Well, it's the asset of how their voice sound together, which is something that carried through all the way to Abbey Road in the song, because, I mean, whatever it was divine intervention that their voices sounded beautiful together.
Yeah, there's nothing like it. But sometimes you just have to think for yourself.
You have to think for yourself.
Oh,
the emergence of George in this album.
Yeah.
It really is. Because he started to build his confidence. The Beatles needed the songs to fill things out. So it was like, bring your best songs and think for yourself. I think what was the working title?
Well, it's George Harrison saying, well, I've got a couple. How about mine? So they worked on it. And what's really great, I was just listening to the outtakes of the session for Think for Yourself, where they're seriously working on George's song, working on the harmony. And there's stuff out there on YouTube now where they become a comedy act. You're hearing the Beatles being like the Marx Brothers because they knew the tape was rolling. So you hear all of this stuff in between, like lukewarm baby's got a custard face. And then they're saying another joke where Paul starts with instead of deodorant, be-odorant, like body odor. It was absolutely hilarious. And John complaining, oh, I can't seem to get the note. I don't know,
Struggling.
Struggling to get certain...
To get the harmony, which is a complicated
complicated harmony, and he kept doing it over and over until he thought he could nail it or get it right, which again shows you how hard they worked on their parts and finding out what their part was and trying to remember it. And then when the tape rolled and you hear a bit of George Martin in the background, and so you hear, you're sort of like a sneak. I'm glad someone recorded that, because that's a sneak peek. It's like being the fly on the wall during a Beatles session when they were actually enjoying themselves. I thought that was great.
Wouldn't it be great if they released all of the chatter and all the talking in between?
Well, you could spend your whole life doing that and not have a life of your own.
But I mean, it would be so interesting to listen to, because it really transports you to the studio. And so while they're making Think for Yourself, which is a George song, George is really leading the way in what he wants in terms of sounds, of what he wants to accomplish with the song. And George Martin is listening, John and Paul are listening, so is Ringo. On this song, Paul puts a fuzz box on the bass, which gives it a very distinctive sound.
Oh yeah, that fuzz box makes a difference, and I love the lower guitar part too. I thought that was brilliant. I thought I don't want to sing it on here and violate any copyright, but it's just incredible what they put together, and plus the lyrics are extremely biting. This is not a friendly song by any means. It's
no, and he had said it's really not written for. I can't remember who it's written for. It's just kind of written maybe against the government. And, he was having that government phase with Taxman. I mean, they're getting the realities of being wealthy millionaires, of taxes and responsibilities and things like that. So Think for Yourself.
I don't know where you got that. I didn't get that impression at all. It sounded deeply personal to me.
No, it's one of his quotes.
I left you far behind, the ruins of the life that you had in mind.
In 1980, George said, Think for Yourself must be written about somebody from the sound of it, but all this time later, I don't quite recall who inspired that tune. Probably the government.
Okay, then. It's come from the horse's mouth. But, well, for me, Think for Yourself is a personal song about, hey, all right, enough, get it together, do your own thing.
Do you think it sounds dated?
No, I don't. Actually, I think with the fuzz box and everything, it maybe you could say that 10 or 15 years ago it sounded dated, but now to me it sounds something that could have been produced in the 80s or in 2000, or could have been. I think it's a great song. I think it works currently, and I could hear it reproduced. I'm surprised that I don't hear a lot of covers of that one, and I don't hear many Beatles cover bands doing it either. I think they should start. Okay, that's a signal to you all. Beatle cover bands, start covering George's songs. Think for yourself.
Wait, are we talking about Beatle cover bands or Beatle tribute bands?
Tribute. Oh, that's Beatle.
I think the tribute bands do, the bigger George songs.
I hope
Something
so.
And
yeah, they
While
do those.
My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Well, everybody knows those, but I think that you should pick up the catalog and go Think for Yourself. It's a great song. Okay, word to the wise.
So the next song is The Word, and this came from. This was the direction, we need more songs. Mm-hmm. And so John and Paul had to go furiously sit together and try to create. And this is an important song, actually, in analysis of the album, in that it sets the stage for John's desire to sloganize or to have anthems or these big ideas. And as he says, the word is love. Everything was about love.
Positive propaganda, I guess, coming from John. John was basically, preaching the word, as they say. But the word being, the word is love, is so fine, it's sunshine. It's a great slogan. And I think that they came together and came up with a really strong, and it's soulful. You get the organ there, so that's different. It's got the keyboards in it. And then they have these unusual harmonies, the high harmonies on it. But it's that's a really strong track, and I think it is mostly John's song. But and it's not one that I listened to a lot. As a kid, I thought, well, that's sort of like a filler for me. But I thought, and you go back and play it again, it is the beginning of the. You're right, it is the beginning of the anthemic version of John, but it's positivity, and I think that he wanted to put that out there.
And this is one of the few songs that they wrote while they were stoned. And in fact, they wrote the lyrics out in a multicolored markers, like for the first time. And
really?
That's what Paul had said, that we'd smoked a bit of pot. Then we wrote out a multicolored lyric sheet. The first time we'd ever done that. We normally didn't smoke when we were working. And John had said about this that the word was written together with Paul, but it's mainly mine. You read the words, it's all about getting smart. It's the marijuana period. It's love and a peace thing. Yeah. Ringo would be happy to hear that.
Oh, yeah.
Peace and love.
He's all peace and love. Peace and love. That's his mantra.
But yeah, I like it.
I like it. It's okay. It's not, I rank it, I give that like a B, in terms of a grade. It's a song. It's not an A song. It's a B song, but it's still good.
It's still enjoyable. And then into this idea of we need more songs, they reach back,
Mm-hmm.
and Paul had like a little party song from 1959. They
Yes.
would go and try to pick up the girls.
An earlier version of it was in 1959, and it was intended as a French pickup song, and it was inspired by the guy named Austin Mitchell, who was one of John's art college tutors, and he held these large parties, and basically Paul was smart and went there, and he had two things on his mind: to have a good time, to drink a lot, to pick up girls. And so he would sit there and quietly in the corner, acting as if he knew French,
like a beatnik,
saying like a beatnik and being mysterious. And he was basically looking to pick up girls, and that was the thing. And John went to him and said, that song that you wrote, why don't you? That was actually pretty good. Why don't you develop that into why don't you work on developing that? So they took Michelle, that old song, and updated it for the album, and there you have it.
And what's interesting is that John wrote the middle piece, which is John was always influenced by the blues musicians and the classics and maybe the darker side or the more gritty side. And so he was listening to Nina Simone and I Love You, I Love You. That was John.
Oh, really? That little bit? I don't want to. I can sing it, but I won't sing it here. But yeah, yes. I like that part.
That was John, and you can, like John would always say, is that you can hear the duality in us. Is that Paul's so optimistic and positive, and here I come in with that's a Debbie Downer.
That's a super bridge. That's a really great bridge. I love you, I love you. That's all I want to say until I find a way. I will say the only words that you will understand. Wow. Okay. Again, that was something where they fit perfectly together. He knew just exactly what to do, and
they also used their childhood friend. I think it was Yvonne. I think it was Vaughn's wife, Yvonne. I don't know, Ivan.
Ivan.
His wife was a French teacher, and she helped write the French for him.
The French for him, they had to learn it. Sont les mots qui vont très bien ensemble.
And again, different things with the Rickenbacker. It's played with a capo, which is unusual. Bass playing with the capo.
Bass playing with the capo.
Yes.
No, I did not know that. Yes. See, that's why we have Karen.
And I love the little guitar bass piece at the end.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and then at the end, like I was saying, the slide reference to Marie Chevalier with the da 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 at the end with the guitar part.
Yes.
That was classic, the killer stuff. I mean, the fade out is one of the best parts, which is why you wanted to keep going. They were great at that. So that's a fun little song, and I know that there's a lot of people I know named Michelle who don't like that song precisely because everyone wants to sing it to them. But I think it's great. I think it's classic Paul.
So flipping the side 2, our honorary Ringo song, What Goes On.
Well, What Goes On is the beginning of Ringo's country career, if you think about it. Later, he did an album called Beaucoup Blues. Well, this song is a very kind of a country rock, Carl Perkins type of feel, where you hear George Harrison, on his guitar pulling those same kind of licks that he likes to pull, like on Honey Don't, etc., and other songs. And it's a decent lyric actually. It's did you mean to break my heart and watch me die? Tell me why. It's like that's pretty serious stuff for Ringo to sing. What Goes On in Your Heart. And so did he co-write that song?
He got a songwriting credit. It was, I think, an older song that they had at One After 909 around that time frame, and then they brought it back because, again, the crush to have songs.
So you mean they dug deep in the catalog and fixed it up, and then they said, let Ringo sing this one.
And John had even said that I hated to waste the bits and the pieces. I wanted to find them to bring them back.
Right. So if you had a good bit, they used to call musical segments bits. Yeah. What goes on in your heart? What goes on in your mind? You were tearing me apart when you treat me so unkind. Yeah, but I thought the verse parts were great. The other day I saw you as I walked upon the road, and when I saw you with him, I could feel my future fold. It's so easy for a girl like you to lie. Tell me why. It's good stuff. I mean, it's a good way to open that side, and I think it's a pretty good performance for Ringo, considering he never considered himself a vocalist. So at the time, anyway.
So then we have Girl.
Ah, girl. That song. Was she told when she was young that pain would lead to pleasure? Did she understand it when they said that a man must break his back
You know who wrote that? That was Paul.
to earn his
That
day
was
of leisure?
Paul's
That was Paul's
reference.
line?
Yes.
Really?
Let me double check my notes here, but I
earn
mean,
his
I
day
think
of
that that's Paul's line.
Will she still believe it when he's dead? Pretty heavy stuff. But it's kind of reflective of girl. She's the kind of girl that puts you down when friends are there. You feel a fool.
Brutal.
And she's brutal.
That's brutal.
I mean, it's very. She's not a nice girl at all. and later in his career, on his last album, he had Woman. On Double Fantasy, he had Woman, which he called the grown-up version of Girl. So what's some of the history you have on that?
Well, John says that's me. This is 1980. That's me writing about this dream girl, the one that hadn't come yet. It was Yoko. Paul in 1994 said it was John's original idea, but it was very much co-written. I remember writing The Pain and Pleasure and A Man Must Break His Back. It was amusing to see if we could get a naughty word on the record. The Beach Boys had a song out where they'd done La La La, and we loved the innocence of that and wanted to copy it, but did not use the same phrase. So we were looking around for another phrase, dit, which we decided to change it in our waggishness to tit.
Yep, tit.
And it gave us a laugh. This is Paul now, his quote. It was good to get some light relief in the middle of this real big career that we were forging. If we could put in something that was a little bit subversive, then we would. George Martin would say, was that dit or tit? You were singing. That's pretty funny. Oh, dit, George. But it does sound a bit like that, doesn't it?
No, it was definitely.
Then he says, then we get in the car and we'd break up laughing. I'm sure. I mean, it's just so hysterical. And the same thing with Drive My Car, right? She's a prick teaser. Are they saying she's a big teaser or is she a prick teaser?
I think she said she's a big teaser. I don't hear the R in there, but I'm going to now listen more closely to it just to see if there's a hint of that there. It never would have gotten radio play if anyone thought that's what they said.
And it also had the Greek influence, the dun 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 dun. Dun.
Yeah, I call that a Greek song. I love that. I love that guitar interplay at the end. That's great. That's what makes it classic. It's like another segment you can't do without. The song would be missing something without it.
And it's the search for new sounds, new ways of presenting it, and it's why, this album, when it was released, it got some mixed reviews because they weren't ready for the changes from the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And so change is scary for some.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
But, in hindsight and listening to it, it's just so amazing. So
that's a great song, but I still think it's predominantly John's song.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Paul just wanted to take some credit for it.
Revisionist Paul.
Yeah, of course.
Anywho. Then we have I'm Looking Through You, which is, I love this song. I could listen to this song 10 times in a row every day and never get tired of it.
Oh, that's still one of my personal favorite songs. I think the vocal on it, in fact, I still, even in my older age, I keep trying to hit those notes, and I can hit, on a good day, I can actually hit most of them. And then you get to You're Not the Same, and he hits that top one. I went, forget it. And if you lower the key, it just ruins it. It's just a great, number one, it's a great vocal. The lyrics is something all of us experience when you think that I thought I knew you, what did I know? How many of us go through life imagining or having a mental picture of someone that you associate with or friends with, and suddenly they act like a stranger or behave like someone you didn't know? Or
how about you were above me, but not today?
You were.
Oh, ouch.
Ooh. Talk about damning with faint praise. Yeah, that's kind of what that song is. He's saying, I loved you and I am thoroughly disappointed in you. That's kind of what that is. You're not who I thought you were. I can't imagine anything more damning than that in a song. I know who that was. I think we were both going to, if we want to overanalyze this and get personal.
Can I just say that if I were Jane Asher and I'm hearing this, I would be like beside myself. But I mean, It's just to air out your
Oh,
personal thing.
She'd come home and smack him across the head and say, no, it's just a song. That's all it is. It's just a track.
Well, what's great about it are the acoustic guitars. And again, there's so much. This is an acoustic.
They worked a lot on
acoustic
this
based
one.
out. They worked many hours. Paul was not quite happy. Again, perfectionist Paul, not quite pleased. The UK version is final mixed without the 2 false starts. And what happened was that George Martin sent the masters to America to be cut for the album, and he expected that they would actually probably listen and cut them out, and they left them on there. So on the Canadian version and on the American version, you have the 2 false starts of the acoustic guitar intro, which I prefer. I like it.
I don't mind that at all. I like hearing a mistake that doesn't really sound like a mistake. It sounds like, oh, we're getting into the song. Okay, now we're going to start the song. I love that stuff. Well, that's just me. George Martin being a professional and a perfectionist, I'm looking through you and think about, again, the use of organ on this album, Hammond organ and the different sounds on it. Let's not forget that the sound quality is different than prior records. They're more heavily use of different guitar sounds and organ sounds, which gives it that kind of soulful feeling.
That was the mid '60s, and so you had Booker T, you had all this
right
Hammond organ craziness, and Procol Harum's Whiter Shade of Pale was to come, and so they're listening to popular music, and it's kind of being absorbed into them. But what I like about I'm looking through you is if you listen to the anthology version, it's a little slower. It's just kind of more of a funkier groove.
Right.
And so...
Well, he was trying different things to make that song work. But
as the acoustic piece that they did,
right.
It really works.
Oh, yeah.
It's just amazing.
Love has a nasty habit of disappearing overnight. Ouch.
I know.
Oh,
not nice.
Oh, that got me. Ooh. So I think that's why we dig it, because it's some genuine emotion coming through that song. There's a lot of anger and disappointment in it, and you don't hear much of that from Paul. And maybe it creeps out occasionally in some songs, but then he relegates those to B-sides, and you just want to throttle him because, like, wait, that's great. Put that on the record. But he doesn't want to be negative.
And the perfect example of that is, it's the original demo for The Lovers That Never Were with Elvis Costello.
Yeah.
Where Elvis is playing piano and Paul is singing, and he's raw with emotion. I mean, it's just an amazing take. Mm-hmm. And then he didn't use anything that sounded like that. He did his own version and...
on Off the Ground, on a solo record. And I love that song, and I love the version that they made. But then you go to hear that demo and going, oh... there's really more power and emotion in it, though that Elvis Costello decided not to record that for himself. But again, a great collaboration, but not wanting to be... Paul liked being polished, and sometimes a little too polished, and John preferred, at least consciously, to make things more raw. And that seemed to be what the impression that they leave on people. But let's not forget that we talked about the White Album, and Paul did Helter Skelter. So yes, he could be loose and rough and raw and do rock and roll, but there were times when he had to, because he's a Gemini, they have to pull back and not show their emotions, right? Or if you want to talk astrologically, Paul pulls back and did not want that rawness there. He had to add a little bit of polish and create a bit of distance on it.
I also think it goes to who they were, and that's why they complemented so well, was that John had the roughness of Twist and Shout and this teddy boy image, even though he came from the wealthiest family.
Right.
But he had that. That's why they mix so well together, is because John needed Paul's polish, and Paul in a way needed the fierceness of John.
Right, his fierceness. I like that word. Okay. Speaking of fierce, I think the next song in my life is fiercely elegant and beautiful. Someone encouraged John to write more about his personal feelings in his life, so he wrote In My Life. And I think lately it has an image, because it's been put in a movie about John, and about him after his death, that it seems almost sappy in a way. But if you go back and listen to the song again, it's really beautiful. It's elegant. I think that George Martin plays the piano on that. Again, he's like another fifth Beatle at times, and you can describe what they did with that piano in the middle. But I think that it became a classic, instant classic, and I think it's become so universal that we almost take that for granted.
Well, one of the things that John said is that initially when he wrote this song, he was kind of listing all the places in Liverpool, and then when he looked back at it, it sounded like, "Ooh, this is what I did on my holiday bus ride," and he didn't like that. So someone that he was talking with said, use your writer ability of who you are and connect it. And so he reworked it into really connecting to lost memories and of things that change and are never going to be the same. And there's that sadness within the song too. It's very
it's elegant.
It's touching. It's so touching because we all know these are places that I remember that, what they say, you can't go back home. It's just not the same.
Well, this is John being sentimental and not, he doesn't like to express that side of himself very often. Like later we talked about the song Good Night on the White Album, which he relegated to Ringo singing because it was frankly very sappy and emotional. Well, I think that he's not sappy in this song, but he approaches a kind of a deep personal emotionality in it that was, I think, new for him in the writing. It kind of began a little earlier in Help, but in this album, it really comes out in a profound way.
And apparently Paul helped with the melody, although I think John had said that's not quite true, but Paul says he helped write the melody. And you can hear it, again, very Motownish, very kind of American music influenced. And with this song is that they spent a lot of time on it and to get it just right. And I think in reading what I've read, I think that this is George Martin's favorite song of the album. He's just so amazed by it. And they initially had a keyboard intro, and George Martin played a Hammond organ. And if you go on YouTube, you can search it and you can find how that sounds. But George Martin was not pleased with it. He just said it didn't match the grandness of the song. It just didn't bring it to where it should have been.
Grandness, I think grandness is the key, and I think that.
And while the Beatles were away, during this time they had gotten their MBE from the Queen, and there were a couple times when they weren't in the studio, and this is, again, the 4.5-week period. And so George Martin went into the studio, and he had a technique that he'd been used all along called the wind-up piano.
I think that the middle solo, just to wrap this up, it was distinctly British. It was elegant. It was royal in feel.
So what he did is he played the piano at an octave lower at half speed, and then when it's played at, I guess, normal speed, it speeds it up. So he said anybody can sound like they're really good when they use this technique.
Producers that aren't afraid to play with speed and make it work.
But you know what? He did it he just did it, and then he said to the boys, "This is what I've come up with." And they said, "Yeah, that sounds great." So I think it's probably, one of the last times where he actually did something, and but I'm sure in the future after this that they would have had to have given him permission to do so.
Well, if I'd played on that track, I'd probably say it was my favorite track too. So maybe there's a little producer's ego in that one. But in fairness, it's a beautiful track. It's a classic track. Everyone loves it. Everyone knows it. And having some distance from hearing it, it still holds up. But I can't wait to get to the next song, Wait, which is another...
The Prince of Puns.
The Prince of Puns, yes. Another song, Wait Until I Come Back to Your Side, We'll Forget Those Tears We Cried. And this, to me, is another attempt at being very soulful. It's done in minor keys, and it's got that kind of feel to it. It's definitely a group effort, and it's soulful. It's a good kind of mid-tempo song. To me, it's a bit of filler as an album piece for a Beatles song. Yes, again, for a Beatles song, it's kind of a bit of a filler, but when you play it as part of the album, it fits right in. It's got a great feel, a good vibe, good vocals. Wait Till I Come Back to Your Side. It harkens back to
the end. I've been alone.
and then you have the guitars going wah wah. At the end, that's a little bit hokey, but I like it. It's fun.
Yeah. So it's plays well. These songs are not that long. I mean, I think like the longest song was like 3.5 minutes or so. So these are not
More like 2.5 minutes if you really look at the.
yeah, these are short songs.
They're short
songs.
I love songs that are short. I think the songs these days are too long-winded. Keep it short, 3 minutes, unless it's Hey Jude. Then it's okay. Next one, moving along. Again, George reaching maturity as a writer. If I Needed Someone. To this day, I think that song sounds better even now than it did then. It wasn't considered like a single type of song, but I think if it were redone today, it could be a hit. It's a great song. If I needed someone to love, you're the one that I'd be thinking of. If I had some more time to spend, then I guess I'd be with you, my friend. It's about, I'm very, very busy in my life, but I would want to be with you if I could. And we all have that kind of feeling. It's a great tune. And one of his best melodies and a great guitar refrain in it.
Well, what he says is that, you can do a lot with the chord D, where you can have a lot of variations there, a lot of permutations with that D chord. And he uses his Rickenbacker 12 string and it's very influenced by the Byrds and I think he kind of nicked something and got permission from the Byrds to use it.
Sure, on the guitar sound. And never mind. Remember, he wrote this himself. Think about the bridge. Had you come some other day, then it might not have been like this. That is an incredible bridge. If I wish I'd written a bridge like that to a song. The entire thing fits really well. I think that George reaching full maturity as a songwriter.
Building his confidence and also being really legitimized by John and Paul and George Martin as well, because he's being he's advocating for himself and how he wants things to sound and to play out. And so, did you know that the Hollies covered this at that time in the '60s? If I Needed Someone,
I did not know that.
I'd have to go listen to it. I haven't.
I want to hear their version of it. I think that'd be great for the Hollies. That sounds like it could be a Hollies song. That's great.
But it is very hookish, if you want to say.
Yeah.
When you hear that beginning of it.
Yeah, and you're right. It is very Byrds like the song, the group, the Byrds like very similar to that.
The influence for the Byrds of Dylan on Norwegian Wood.
It's all over the place.
Just John has said this is the pod album, but I mean, it's more than that. It's really we've got our acoustics, we've got our whole array of instruments now that we're going to blend in.
Right.
And then let me take on Run for Your Life. Because
all right,
let me tell you.
You take that one on.
Run for Your Life. And I remember this as a young girl listening, and it's like, it's a little creepy there. And
scary.
Even getting that sense, but as I listen to the Beatles channel on Sirius XM, they play this song quite a bit. And I'm sure at the time, it's just what it was. It's, Jimi Hendrix is singing about, hey, Joe, you shot your woman down. It was acceptable. But now I do wish that Sirius XM would remove that song. It's just such a...
Well, sometimes I also wish they'd remove Neil Young singing Down by the River, I Shot My Baby.
Yes.
I don't need to hear that over and over and over again. I mean, again, these are pieces of art, and
it's reflective of culture and of the times,
right? But it's not a go-to song for me either. I'm like, okay, that one actually sounds a bit dated. Even the guitar solo on it, it sounds like okay, it almost sounds too celebratory when you hear the ding, the guitar, the happy guitar solo in the middle. It just jars you a bit.
It's based on a Elvis Presley, I think, something that he said. There's a line in there. I see but catch you with another man.
That's the end.
Or something like to that effect. And it's like, I think it's John's least favorite. He stated that.
Later in life, he just thought it was trash. He hated it. Well, John became, being with Yoko, more of a feminist and became more enlightened and was reading books and thought, gosh, I made this song. Oh, this is awful. All right. So he didn't even like some of his own material later. I mean, and he has that right to change and decide. But as a period piece, it's kind of like in the same category as Delilah that Tom Jones sang. And those types of songs, they're deeply, there's great songs for psychopaths. I mean, everyone gets a song, and I guess they get the sociopath gets the song too. And that's kind of what those are about. They're scary songs. They're not meant to be.
Do I need to listen to Delilah again? What am I missing on that one?
Oh, gosh.
I'll go back and listen to that separately.
A guy that knifes someone,
Okay,
it's horrible.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a horrible theme. You get some of this stuff there, and it's deeply, deeply misogynistic. But as a piece for the album, I tried to ignore the words and just listen to the musicianship and the playing on it and the vocal. The performances are always great. Whether or not you like the material. But as it hangs together as an album from 1965, let's remember the time that it was in. It was a huge revolutionary change in the way music was starting to be recorded, and a shift away from being just a pop band into an art pop band or artistic band. And that's what
expansion and growth. And again, this is where they begin to stay in the studio after midnight till early in the morning to get things done, to rehearse and to bring all these flavors and opportunities during the session to see where it may lead.
Now, that what could have been part of this album and should have been, had we not separated singles from albums in those days, was We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper, which are both incredible songs as singles.
A
double A single, which is, again, a rare thing to have both sides equally be hits. Everyone knows We Can Work It Out, Try to See It My Way, Paul's optimism, and then John singing bluesy Life is Way Too Short and There's No Time
for fussing and fighting,
my friend, which, again, they end up fussing and fighting anyway, but that's a great tune. A John and Paul song with Paul writing the main part and then John writing a bridge. Classic stuff, still great, still love it. And Day Tripper is kind of like the flip side of Drive My Car. She was a day tripper. You know the lyrics.
Well, the Day Tripper was about, it was really about people, and I guess, and it's just taking a day trip and a drinking day trip, I suppose, or just people who out are doing things. And Paul had made a comment that we were full-time trippers. So this is what their thing, but it's primarily a John song.
Oh, you mean like a drug song, kind of a reference in it?
I don't know what he's saying about the drugs, but she was a day tripper.
Sunday driver, yeah.
I think he meant it more in terms of there's so many people who were so full of themselves, and it was like, hey, we're in this full time, and you're just like a piece of it, like a day trip.
It took me so long to find out, and I found out. So again, it's kind of seeing through people.
But it's ambiguous again as well. See?
Right. It's a great song, and who can discount the great riff, one of the best hook riffs ever written. So you know the song, and every musician out there that's serious and is in a Beatles tribute band plays that song and has to get it. And then the bass line repeats after the guitar line.
It mirrors it, but comes in later in a higher thing.
Got a good reason for taking the easy way out. And I think it's very soulful, and that would have fit great on this record if you could fit 16 songs, which nowadays in CDs you can do. But that's all of the same period. So that's my takeaway from this is...
What's your favorite song from this album?
That's really hard for me to say. I don't like picking a favorite. It's like picking a favorite child or a favorite thing. But I'd have to say, picking a favorite off this song.
Off the album.
I'll say you go first. Let me think about it.
I would say I'm Looking Through You.
Yeah, I think I'd have to concur. I'm Looking Through You is, to me, the strongest track because of its emotional impact.
I like it because of the guitar, how well the guitar sounds in it, how it was recorded. The guitars are just so clean and interesting to listen to. And then his vocal is amazing.
Yeah, totally.
I could listen to it all the time. And then after that would be Norwegian Wood.
Yeah, and Norwegian Wood. That's a close tie. I was going to say Norwegian Wood. Everyone loves Norwegian Wood. Everyone likes to play Norwegian Wood. And yeah, I love them both. I mean, I like most of this record, but those two are like just amazing songs from two incredible writers. You can't really do better than that.
Well, so that is our thoughts and our joy in discussing the Rubber Soul album by the Beatles. And we hope that you enjoyed this podcast. And we thank you so much for listening to Thank God for the Beatles, because we are so grateful for the Beatles. And you can find this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Anchor. We just got added to Amazon Music under their podcast section, and other platforms as well.
And YouTube.
We also have a YouTube channel, and you could find us there if you wanted to leave a comment. You can leave a comment, chat with us, or whatever. So thank you so much for listening. Take care. Be well. Bye-bye.